What's up, everybody? Interesting one today as we're watching something for the first time together. And I always think that that's interesting and fun because I have no idea what this person is going to say. Some of you have already watched this interview, which is good. You're going to know what's coming and you're going to be able to react with me and tell me what you think. And some of you have not watched it. So we'll be watching it for the first time together. My plan is to watch Nate Eaton's interview with one of the jurors that actually deliberated and voted on the guilty verdict for Lori Vallow. And I also have queued up another one people sent me, which was an alternate juror from a law and crime interview, which only if you guys are interested, we can watch that one as well, as long as time allows. I'll try to do 1.5 speed so that we can watch as many videos as we can. But it's really interesting to hear from jurors. I love it. We try to do it as much as we can. In our cases, we learned so much. We learned what works, what doesn't work, what they thought, what they picked up. And I really think that this is part of the process that if the jurors are comfortable with it, if the jurors are okay explaining what they thought, if they feel safe, if they don't feel like people are going to condemn them or jump all over them or be nasty to them or blame them for anything. I think this is a great part of the process to let everybody understand what it's like, that these are real people trying to do their job. They're not back there, trying to get Lori Vallow or trying to get somebody or trying to push a political agenda or whatever it may mean. Does that happen from time to time? Sure. I'm sure it does. But most of these jurors are back there trying to do their best. And they're normal, everyday people in our communities, which is how it's supposed to be done. And that's how our country was founded, that these big decisions, the biggest decisions in people's lives, should be made by the other people in the community. And I think that that's really cool. A lot of people mentioned the shirt. Yes, it's so comfortable. I love it. I love the size of the oversized tee. It's from the merch store, in case you can't tell. It says, "What's up, everybody," here, embroidered. And then, Lori, here, if you want to check it out on the merch store. But yeah, so this is going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to listening and watching this together with you. We will stop. We will answer questions. We will talk about it. And then again, if we have time, we will also do the alternate juror. So hit that like button and let's get started.
Number 8. I'm Nate Eaton. Thank you for watching today. I'm here with Saul Hernandez. He was juror number 8 in the Lori Vallow Daybell trial that just wrapped up a few days ago. Saul, thanks for having me over. How you feeling?
Tired.
Yeah?
Yeah, a little tired.
Is it weird to not be in a courtroom this morning, to actually be out here in the sunshine and enjoying the weather? I'm sure it's nice.
Yeah, it's been an overwhelming time, and I think I'm happy that we did our job, and I'm happy that it's done, and I can move on and do a bunch of things I've neglected.
Sure. All right. Well, let's go back to the beginning before you were selected as a juror. What did you know about the case? Not much.
I didn't know much. My wife watches these shows, and oftentimes, I'll walk in the room and she's watching the show, and she watches so many that I know I caught pieces of a documentary. Sometimes when I work from home, I like to have the TV on the background, and I heard again some pieces about it, but I didn't know as much as I do now.
Sure.
So was he saying that his wife watches like true crime stuff and was watching this documentary and he heard some of it? That's interesting to me. I'm sure he let everybody know in the courtroom about that. And I think it's interesting. And I think if you live in that area, it would be really hard. And I'm interested in both of these jurors. Did both of them at least know what the case was about and know stuff about the case? I would think the answer has to be yes, that it wasn't totally foreign to them.
And you get the jury summons. And what's interesting is, Saul, you've served before on juries.
Correct. Yeah, this is my the third time I have been summoned and the third time I've been selected.
Wow. So were you thinking this might be just another short day or two trial like your previous ones?
So, I didn't know what to think. I thought for sure they're going to look at me and say, hey, this guy has been here twice before in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
Let's kick him out.
That's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
Let's describe the process when you went down to the courthouse.
Man, it was clearly something was happening because the previous 2 times I didn't remember seeing that many people. And when I showed up, there were quite a few more people. And again, I didn't know what trial it was for. When our group had got a chance to move into the courtroom, I still hadn't realized it was her. I thought it was an attorney, a bunch of attorneys.
But she was sitting there.
She was sitting there. Yeah. And then maybe about 20 minutes later or 10 minutes later, once the judge started explaining, and I looked at her and I said, oh, wow, that is her.
So I'm sure your wife was curious because she knew the trial was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And Did you want to be a juror? Did she want you to be a juror?
No, I don't think any of us really wanted that. Once I told her, obviously it piqued her interest.
Yeah.
And we talked about what if. But yeah, I don't think any of us really had any expectations. I didn't know this then, but I know it now. I think there were at least 1,200 people summoned, maybe more. I don't know.
Yeah, there were a lot of people, and it took a week to pick all of the jurors, and every day it was questioning of each of the jurors who went down until they got to the final group. And then each side, I believe, got 8 or 12 strikes where they could just cancel however they wanted. And then you found out, what, the Friday before it started, that you were an official juror?
Yeah, it was Friday. We were again requested to come back on, well, I was requested to come back on Thursday. And when I showed up, I knew then that I was one of a potential 48, 60 people, something like that.
So the trial starts, and you know that you're going to be there for up to 10 weeks. And one of the first things the prosecutor said in opening arguments was, this is a case about money, power, and sex. And looking back, is that how you would describe the case, the trial?
You know, at first, I felt it was a reach, and maybe a reach for them to start that way. And over time, as time progressed, evidence showed up and testimony was given. Yeah, it became clear to me it was really about money, power, and sex.
So how about that? That's always a good feeling for a prosecutor if the jury starts saying your theme is what this case was about. And it's almost even better that he felt like it was a reach in openings, because he's like, oh yeah, you're going to say that? You're going to say something like that? Like we're on some true crime show, money, power, sex. That's what everybody wants to say. That's just good for TV. And then it's like, oh no, it wasn't a reach. The evidence showed that's actually correct. I think that is amazing for the prosecutor if you hear a juror say something like that about your theme and how you present the case.
Things, I told you this last night at dinner, but I noticed that you were taking a lot of
Nate
notes.
Nate has had dinner with him last night, which was interesting. And Nate was literally watching him. So they saw each other in the courtroom. It's so interesting to think about this like Inception style stuff that happens in real life, very serious trials.
And there were some jurors where I had a better view of. You were one that I was able to see, especially in the beginning. You were taking a lot of notes, and you seemed intently focused. And it seemed like you took your job serious. Was there a witness or a piece of evidence that really kind of solidified the case in your mind?
You know, I would tell you the forensic people, the forensic scientists, were key, I think, for me, because when they present that kind of evidence, you know, it's black and white. You remove feeling from it. And there was so much throughout the trial that oftentimes it got confusing. Timelines, and depending on which one of the prosecutors got out there were times it got confusing. But I think for me, Detective Hart or Investigator Hart, FBI, he really brought, if there were any loose ends in my mind or questions I had, he brought them together at the end for me, and were very helpful.
He was one of the last witnesses.
So I think that's also interesting too. He was confused at certain portions, and we always try to avoid that as lawyers presenting cases to jurors. We don't want them to get confused. But he said Detective Hart or Investigator Hart from the FBI tied it all together, made it all make sense. We also have to make sure that we're doing that in the case, especially if there are going to be confusing portions to it. So it's great that he said there was some confusing portions, but they tied it all together. I see all the purple hearts and people coming from Emily's stream. What's up, law nerds?
This is, I think, the second to last witness or third, and he was on the stand a whole day, and he went through Lori's iCloud.
Yes. So
that you're saying that's what was impactful, seeing all those text messages.
I mean, not just the text messages, but the timeline, right? You start something from 2018 and then it progresses. You can see the relationship evolve from a potential, maybe inappropriate friendship to clearly having an affair. And then now they're putting their brains together as to how they are going to execute murder of not one, but multiple people.
Do you think Lori was the mastermind now after seeing that trial, or Chad?
You know, I think same thing. I think as you start to look at all the evidence provided and you understand the timeline from the start to the end, to me, it felt like Chad was really the driver. He was clearly in the driver's seat at first. Lori liked what she heard. She was a goddess. You know, she was married to this very powerful being, and through multiple lives. And over time, again, you see that relationship evolve to the point that at some point, Lori takes the driver's seat, takes the wheel, and Chad's okay with it.
So what's interesting about that answer is if you're Chad Daybell or you're Chad Daybell's lawyer, this is easily accessible to you. And if you hear him say this, he, and it seems like most of the other jurors, basically also convicted Chad Daybell for these murders. Now, this is why they wanted to split it. But that would make me pretty nervous if I'm Chad Daybell how he's talking about how Chad started out as the mastermind, was telling Lori stuff she wanted to hear. Then Lori kind of took control and they put their brains together and how they were going to execute this plan of these crimes. Not great if you're Chad Daybell.
Chad lets that go because in my mind, he wanted one thing from her. And once he secured that, he was okay letting her take the lead role.
Letting her drive the car.
Yeah.
He wanted one thing from her. I think that's the storm, right? And then he was going to let her drive the car. So it does definitely seem like they think Lori was the ringleader in all of this. Maybe that's good for Chad. But again, definitely seems like he thinks Chad was involved.
Yeah, I mean, and she has that personality based on what I saw. She likes to lead.
And again, another thing you mentioned last night were those text messages when they had their first fight and how Lori was ignoring Chad.
Yeah.
What did you think of that, those encounters?
That blew my mind. That blew my mind because when you think about, I can see a teenager, you know, a kid being so impressionable that they may fall for something like that. But when you think about an adult that has lived a lifetime, and he is telling her that she's has no protection, and then she acknowledges it, and he goes to the point of saying, "You need to give me a thumbs up emoji." That blew my mind. I couldn't comprehend how that even made sense for her to be like, okay.
And then she writes back, "I love you," and he says, "Okay, I'm going to restore all your powers." It's
something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. We also heard in the trial phone calls.
I mean, that's manipulation. That's control. That would go a long way with me as well. You know, and that's why I kind of felt like Chad had a lot of the more powerful position, but no doubt Lori Vallow encouraged and took part and made sure these crimes happened.
Lori and her son and her sister Summer. How did those affect you?
Yeah, Colby's and Summer's testimony was powerful. It was very powerful. I think when Colby came to the stand, I could feel his anger, and I was angry for him. I think hearing the pain in his voice, expressing to his mom what she did. I don't know, man. It was out of this world. And then Summer was, again, very, very powerful, telling her how much she loves her, how much she still loves her. It was really hard to sit through that.
You also heard the podcast that the defense was able to get in, and you were able to hear Lori talk about how she had seen Jesus. I don't know if you remember that, but that was a way that the defense got that in so that you all could hear her without her having to be cross-examined by the prosecution. What did you think of her words on that podcast? It was a testimony she gave from years ago, but still you heard her, state of mind.
From what I remember, almost like a fantasy, like her reality is one, but it's really, I think for most people, it's just a fantasy. And again, very much a leadership role through that podcast. And then I think she liked the power that gave her, the authority figure that it made her be to those people.
Do you believe that she really thinks she's a goddess?
Honestly, in my mind, yes. Once there all the evidence that we saw, it's hard to answer that, but in her world, in her reality, yeah.
Describe what it was like sitting in your seat every day, front row, right there by the witness stand, looking at her. Did that ever, become awkward for you, or did you have to control your emotions, or was it just you were there to do the job and she was sitting there and you were here?
Mostly that. I was there to do a job. I think she deserves a fair shot, and I went in there with an open mind. I know I heard what I had heard wasn't great about her, but at the end of the day, I felt
so. What he had heard about her in the past was not great. That's interesting to me because he's, admitting, and he seems, by the way, this is why this guy's been on multiple juries. He can sit there regardless of what he heard. Sounds like he can listen to evidence, weigh it, think the prosecution's stretching in opening statements, and then comes to their side by closing because they presented the evidence. It's kind of how it's supposed to work. They have the burden. They choose what cases to present and prosecute. He's incredibly level-headed, but I mean, it was probably literally impossible to find jurors that had never heard anything bad about Lori Vallow. I mean, that's what I would think. And just because you heard something bad doesn't mean you're not going to be fair and unbiased, which this guy seems like he was going into it, even though he had heard stuff.
That, she deserves a shot, right? She deserves a defense, and innocent until proven guilty. And, I kept looking for the human side of her, the moment where she'd help me understand what happened, what was really the story. And I kept looking for that, and I never found it.
Do you wish you would have taken a stand and spoken?
Yeah, I very much wish I could have heard from her.
That's not uncommon. Basically, every juror wants to hear from the defendant, and they're supposed to not hold it against them. They probably don't hold it against them, but a piece of them is like, man, I really wish I could have heard from you. Maybe it would have made a difference. I don't think it would have made a difference in this case. What do you guys think? Do you think it would have made a difference if she would have testified? Let me know in the comments.
Again, the prosecution stacked the deck, right? They brought on so many witnesses, so much evidence, and throughout the trial, I wanted to be open-minded, and I was waiting for that moment where she could explain to me and my fellow jurors that what really happened, what is it that we're missing, and yeah, we never got to hear it. So,
what did you think when the defense said, "We don't think they've proven their case, we rest"? Were you expecting more?
Yes, I was clearly expecting at least a week of witnesses, evidence, something. And I had questions, and I remember writing my notes. And since we couldn't talk about the case, I figured, when they provide their defense, their testimony, their witnesses, their evidence, it'll answer those questions for me.
So that's this is fair, because basically what he's saying is the state proved their case, and he wanted to see if the defense was going to able to poke holes in it or make him second guess what he believed the state proved. It's not, it's really hard for jurors to conceptualize that the defense literally has no burden, and they don't have to present evidence. They don't have to answer questions that you have. If there are questions that you have and the state didn't answer all of them, then it should be not guilty, right? That's what a defense attorney would argue. But I do think it's fair in the way that he characterized it, in that he said, he wrote down things. I was like, well, how is Lori going to answer that? That's the way I listen to it, is how's Lori going to answer that? This is so bad. How are they going to prove that she wasn't involved in it when we have all these text messages sounding like she was? How is she going to prove that she was not the ringleader when all of the evidence shows that she was? That's the way I think what he meant it, and kind of how I'm hearing it. But you never like to hear him say, I thought the defense had to present some evidence. But I think what he meant was the state got to be on a reasonable doubt. So the only way it wasn't going to be guilty is if the defense did something, and that's fair.
Those questions were never answered.
Never answered.
Tell me about viewing those autopsy photos.
Yeah, that was hard. That was hard, man. I think as a human being, you never really train for something like that. You don't expect to see that. And I had not realized that my kids are exactly the same age apart as Tylee and JJ. And it was painful to see that, because I have seen the relationship that my boys have. How my oldest embraces my little one.
And this is jurors bringing in their own personal experience and life experience into a case. Every juror is going to do that. We realize that. And this is what happens sometimes. They're usually going to relate themselves with a plaintiff, a defendant, a criminal defendant, and just think about things and compare lives. And even though they would never do what they're accused of doing, just thinking about, the kids weren't even the same ages. He's just saying they were the same ages apart. And that was enough for him to connect it. Very common.
Almost like a father figure sometimes. Yeah. Takes care of him, loves him. And I could only imagine what Tylee and JJ's relationship was like. And that was heartbreaking.
What was it like in the jury room? The court took a break that day after the photos. What was it like going back in that jury room? You guys can't talk about it, yet you've seen some horrible, gruesome, graphic stuff.
It was the most awkward silence I've ever experienced in my adult life. Just no words for it. It felt like hours. I'm sure it was just minutes before we broke that silence, but it felt like hours.
The day that they said there was a hair on duct tape surrounding it was Lori's hair on duct tape surrounding JJ's body. Was that a pivot point in your mind? Was that a big, bombshell of, whoa, what were your thoughts when that witness said that?
Not really, because at the end of the day, JJ lived with Lori, so I would expect that hair would be on there. In terms of the hair being right there, no, not really. And
interesting, because I felt like that was a pretty big piece of evidence, but he didn't really even think it was that big of a deal. And it actually seems like, which, again, kudos to this guy, he believed the defense's argument that could have been on the pajamas, could have been in the bag. She lived with JJ, could have been anywhere in the house, could have been her duct tape before it was used. So I think he weighed that pretty fairly and didn't see it as a big piece of evidence. I think that's interesting.
I struggled with that because I didn't know how much weight to give that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if the defense really brought it home on that piece of evidence. And since we couldn't ask questions, I just wrote it down as important, but one of those loose ends that I wish I would have heard more.
And one of the things that I had forgotten, so you said it last night, is you weren't able to bring all those notes home.
Right.
The court has all those notes. So from all the jurors.
Yes.
Describe what a day is like for a juror, for you guys. I mean, you had a secure van that took you to and from the courthouse. You parked in an undisclosed location. Describe the procedures that were taken to protect you guys.
A very uncomfortable van filled with 10 adult people, 2 of them.
2 vans.
2 vans. One of them had a funky smell the whole
Don't get
time.
in that one.
Yeah, it was, honestly, in my opinion, more of an inconvenience, right? Because we're already asked to give up so much of our day, so much energy and emotion. And then to add more time to meet, drive together, get through security, get through the elevators, sit in a room and wait until they're ready. And then you go through the whole day, and then you have to do that same exercise just backwards. I mean, trying to work, trying to still be a husband, a wife, a father, it was challenging.
Because you had to be there.
So a couple questions came in that are interesting around what I was saying about creating doubt. Shindog City, if the defense did something, it's called establishing reasonable doubt. Specifically, the burden the defense bears, regardless of burden being considered solely the requirement of the prosecution. So this is legally and factually incorrect. There is no burden for the defense to create or establish or explain reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt can come from the evidence, from the lack of evidence, or from inconsistent evidence itself. It does not have to come. It does not come from the defense. The defense can poke holes. They do not need to. The state has to get rid of all the reasonable doubts. That is the burden of the state. And Lisa asked a similar question. Oops, sorry. Seems like the defense could have at least argued some of the points or presented another scenario to create doubt. So they did argue some of the points in closing, which may have been what Shindog, I think that's how you say that name, was talking about as well. They did argue them just unsuccessfully in closing. And then Lisa, yes, if we have time after we watch this one, that's why we're listening to it on a 1.5 speed. And if that's too fast, you can always on the playback speed, slow it down. We are going to try to watch that alternate juror video after this. If we have time, we may be cutting it close. If you guys are interested in it, let me know by saying alternate juror in the comments.
7:30 to get in the van, go to the courthouse, secure entrance, away from all the public. Even if anyone saw them, you could not talk to the jurors about this at all. My fear was I was going to run into you in the grocery store and someone was going to say, a reporter's following you. I mean, so then you go into the courtroom, you sit.
Sorry, there's a couple other questions here. I haven't seen this yet, but if they want to talk, I think they should, personally. Mrs. B, hey, what would happen after a verdict if it was found that a juror did hear some outside info of the trial that may have impacted their decision? If they say that it impacted their decision, what they heard before, or if they lied on the jury questionnaire under oath, that could create issues. If you go look at our Ghislaine Maxwell juror video, where there was some potential misconduct and the judge had to bring them in, ask them questions, they hired an attorney, they had to get immunity before they would answer the questions, it can become an absolute mess and it can potentially affect the verdict. For a deeper dive on that, check out our video on the Ghislaine Maxwell juror.
And again, you mentioned on the breaks, you can't talk about the case at all with your other jurors. And there was a lot of downtime sometimes for you all where you'd be sent out of the courthouse while something was being discussed.
Yeah.
And what would you all do during the breaks? Just talk about family, sports, whatever?
I try to work as much as I could. I try to work, and when the Wi-Fi wasn't working, I just do other things. And yeah, I mean, we got to know each other. We talked about families and showed pictures of our family. And yeah.
One of the things you mentioned to me is you all paid attention to the gallery.
Yeah.
The people that came to watch, you knew who was there every day. And what was that like? We're all watching them. Unbeknownst to us, they're all, I guess, watching us too at times.
Curiosity. I think we spent so much time with all these people that we could never speak to. I had no idea who was family, who was media. Yeah, at the end, you kind of put that together. And I couldn't see you guys typing, so some of my fellow jurors could because they were on that side. I was clear on the other side. Yeah, just interesting process and who was who. And yeah.
Another thing you saw was the beach photos, the wedding photos of Lori and Chad. What did you think, when you saw those, they're married while their kids are buried in the yard, and I believe you all knew that at that point. Did that leave an impression on you?
Yeah, I think disgusted is the best word I can give you. I was disgusted. I think it's one thing to do what they've done, but to that point, to move on so quickly from a 20-plus year of marriage, 2 kids on the ground, and then you look at the evidence and how it was planned out with buying rings, buying dresses prior to booking flights. I don't know. It's just disgusted.
Did you ever notice?
That was a big thing too. Like every time we talked about it, it's like, and I think that's what got a lot of the public just up in arms. Like, how can you be so cold? Regardless of if you did it or not, knowing they weren't with you and you were lying about it, just that is enough to be disgusted.
Just a change in Lori's demeanor during the trial, where she was upset or angry, or was she always stoic?
No, she definitely had her personality and her body language changed during certain times, specifically when photos of the kids or evidence was presented about the kids. She would almost want to hide, almost like she'd want to disappear from the courtroom. And then there were other times where testimony was given by witnesses that clearly she didn't agree with. Her feelings were not reserved. She made it known that she was not happy. She didn't agree. And there was one very powerful one for me. When Audrey, I forget her last name.
Baratario.
When Audrey got up there and gave her testimony, and Lori's demeanor was very aggressive. She wanted to, it felt like she was going to jump out of that chair and that desk at any moment. She was leaning forward in a very aggressive manner, her body.
I think that's exactly how Nate described it as well in his recap video, which is really interesting because people in the gallery and jurors can see the same thing. Do they always perceive it the same way? Maybe not, but it seems like they did here.
Language. That led me to believe that again, she's an alpha, and if she could control the situation on somebody who was perhaps gullible, maybe a weaker mindset, that she would.
Did you ever get to a point hearing some of the religious
and there's
stuff?
just so much of that. Again, he's about to get in the religious stuff. There's so much of that goes into that religious manipulation when you do feel like, you're the alpha or people are going to listen to you or follow you. We've seen it over, the world's history, how that happens.
And text messages where you thought, this is complete nonsense. Or as the defense called it, crap, weirdo, stupid. And were you able to process all of that?
I don't know that you can ever process that. I think you try. I think you try to reason, make the best of what you have, but definitely don't understand how can a grown person, two and more than two, believe all of that. And yeah, it makes me question a lot of things.
Having seen all the evidence, all the thousands of hours spent, how would you describe the efforts of law enforcement?
I think they did a good job with what they had. I don't know that you ever can really train for something like this. I think they did a good job with what they had. You question some things that happened, and I'm sure there's a reason for it. I'll probably never know, but you question, had some things been done different early on, would any of us be here?
Do you have an example of one of those things?
Well, and we didn't consider this during our deliberations because it was clear to us, the instructions were clear. Arizona, evidence and testimony is only for demonstrative purposes.
Sure. Yeah.
Interesting. So he's about to bring up the Charles Vallow situation, which I'm interested to hear what they all thought about that. If they basically in their mind convicted her of that as well. Seems like they probably would have. But at least he does say he thinks the defense attorneys did a good enough job. He didn't hate them. He didn't hold it against them. They represent her. I always think that that's, admirable in jurors realizing that defense attorneys are doing their jobs and they're not bad people. So I'm glad that he said that as well.
And we all were very, very respectful of the rules, the directions that we were given. But now being removed from that, I think the police department in Phoenix had some significant red flags that had they been followed up on, maybe we're not here.
Do you mean after Charles was shot?
Before and after.
Before and after.
Like those, again, I don't know. I guess I didn't hear every second of this trial, so I don't know how much of it came out in this trial, but I remember from the documentary and from YouTube, the body cam videos of Lori talking to law enforcement. And we talked about that, how she kind of sweet talked her way out of, cars being stolen and purses being stolen and kids being taken, and then her leaving at the right time and all that stuff, again, showed you about Lori Vallow and who she was and the generally bad gal rule.
Before he was shot, that body cam. How would you describe the prosecution, their overall case? And sitting in a juror's seat, you trying to comprehend it all and understand it all. How would you describe it?
I felt like there were a couple of them that did a great job. They were very much matter of fact, to the point, easy to follow. And then you had a couple that were hard to follow sometimes, were hard to stay engaged with. And, as you're taking notes and you're doing the very best job that you can, sometimes it was hard to keep up, and to the point that it got confusing at times.
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe the defense?
I think they had a tough job ahead of them, and I don't know that I feel bad. Maybe that's not the right word, but I just think they had a steep hill to climb from the start. And
so here's where I'm actually going to backtrack on something I just said. So when he said he almost felt bad for the defense and they didn't have a lot to work with, to me, that is exactly why I had a problem with Jim Archibald and Letitia Stock's lawyers' opening statements, almost apologizing for having to represent Lori Vallow and Letitia Stock, almost sounding like they wish they didn't have to be here, which basically tells the jury, it gives a negative view of their client. That is not what you want to do. And regardless of what you want to say about Dick Harpootlian and whether he went too far saying he has the honor of representing Alec Murdaugh and what people think about him now, at least the jurors might be like, oh, this lawyer has a lot of respect for his client. I think that's probably a positive outlook on this. Let's start out and see what happens. And again, they were still convinced of his guilt and that he was actually a horrible person and not a good guy like Harpootlian said. Fine. But when you start out as the lawyer representing the criminal defendant, apologizing and basically agreeing that they're a horrible person and you wish you didn't have to be here, that ain't great. And the fact that he wanted to say, oh, Mr. Archibald, I am so sorry you have to do this, that tells you everything you need to know about how effective that defense opening was.
I wish I would have heard more of a defense. And yeah, I never heard it. So it was interesting seeing some of the conversation and the objections, especially from Thomas.
You said last night, and I think you kind of knew what was coming after a while as far as the objections. I don't want to say there was a pattern, but you kind of, in a way, and as an observer, if you're there every day, you kind of know, oh, they're going to object here and here and here, and you kind of saw that happen.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Can you describe the deliberation process for us?
Yeah, once the case was turned over to us, the first thing we did is name a foreman, and we did a voting system, selection by voting, and the person that we selected did a phenomenal job. I think we were all clear as to the magnitude of the job that we had ahead of us and the importance of it. I think we all remained very professional, respectful to one another, because there were conversations that at times, not heated, but definitely a couple of us got excited about them. We selected the charges that we felt were, we didn't have to go through as much evidence to come to a conclusion. So
the charge that had been proven the most you started with.
Correct.
And what was that?
The first one was grand theft.
So basically they were saying in the beginning of the process, some of this stuff was easy. We knew some of it. We really didn't have to even talk about it. And they start with grand theft. My guess is the charges that were connected to the children were probably pretty easy as well. I'm interested to hear what he says about the Tammy Daybell charges, which throughout I kind of felt like was the hardest one. And if there was one we could split hairs on and see, did the state actually prove it? Then, I can understand if that took a little bit longer, but the kids and the theft, slam dunk, I think, based on the evidence. And we'll see if that's how they felt as well. He said grand theft was pretty easy for them. They didn't have to look back at the evidence.
Then conspiracy on both counts
For the kids.
And then it was clear, two actually of our jury members voiced their concern with the conspiracy for Tammy. And we knew that, I think for us, that was the hardest count, the hardest charge to come to a conclusion. So we left that to the end. At some point, we decided it was time to go home. This
was on Thursday. You got the case Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And just so you're aware, we thought that the jurors would stay all night because around 5 you got dinner. Dinner was brought in.
Yeah.
But you didn't stay all night. You went home like 2 hours later.
Yeah, I think what happened is we, just imagine all the emotions, all the amounts of evidence that we had to go through. And again, we didn't take this job lightly. We made sure that we gave it our best. And I think by the time we concluded on those 3 counts, a few of us were tired. I know I was. And I voiced my concern that I wanted to be clear-headed, rested, to take on the charges that we knew we were going to have to go through a lot more evidence, a lot more conversation, dialogue, and back and forth. So I and maybe another person made the suggestion to, let's go home and come back.
Mm-hmm. You were caught up in the beginning on the murder charge for Tylee.
I was.
Why?
I want to say it was me and another juror that had questions about it at first. And then through evidence and discussion, this other individual, I think, got behind, the the group, and I wanted to hear more. I just felt like Tylee's murder one charge hadn't been proven beyond reasonable doubt for me yet. And perhaps it was that I didn't remember, or I didn't have all the evidence that I wanted to see. And respectfully, and my fellow jurors did a great job. You know, we talked, they presented, we pulled some exhibits, we went through them all.
Dude, this is so interesting. So again, when we talk about closing arguments, it is not a recap to bore the jury and go through every witness that has testified for the last 6 weeks. But what it is for is to provide the tools, the arguments, the evidence, the exhibits to the jurors that are on your side or agree with your position, or you feel like you've convinced. Give them what they need to convince the other jurors, like this juror who is well thought out and just didn't feel like they got there on this charge. You'll be able to say, in closing, they talked about Exhibit 36, which was this, or this text message, or this picture. And then he's like, oh yeah, I forgot that. And you build, and the jurors were actually presenting and convincing each other, which is part of the process. And again, 12 Angry Men, I've seen it referenced in the chat. You all told me to watch it. I watched it. I'd never seen it before. I saw the original black and white. Loved it. And that can happen. Asking questions, talking about evidence together, making presentations. Pretty wild.
We listened to some more audio, and that helped me come to the conclusion of guilty. You know, it's a big charge, and I really wanted to give it its process, its due process that it required.
And so that happened Friday morning.
Correct.
And then you discussed the conspiracy on Tammy.
Yes.
And that's when you all reached unanimous verdict on all the counts.
Yes. Yeah. Tammy was the last one that we, again, one or two of our members were very clear that that was a hard one for them. So again, did the same exercise with them. And at some point, you know, I got up there and showed what helped me come to my conclusion. And other people did the same exercise with this member. And I don't remember how long it took, but after showing him all the evidence, he was okay.
What was that like when you finally reached the conclusion?
This is how it's supposed to work, guys. Now, if they were resolute and they couldn't be convinced, then they would have been a hung jury. Or maybe the arrest would have said, fine, guilty everywhere else, not guilty on that one, or guilty everywhere else, hung jury on that one. This is how the process works. If there was not enough evidence for all the jurors to unanimously agree, and that's what you think about, how wild is it that everybody can unanimously agree on something? But that's what part of the building of the process is to each other, and trusting each other and getting to know each other, that you start to go in there and you're kind of like have some camaraderie with the group. Really interesting. I actually have Amanda's question starred, so I will answer it as soon as this video ends.
Conclusion, the verdict.
Surreal. You know, like we made it, we did it, we arrived, and I think, I don't know, a sense of we did it the right way. We didn't rush into this. We gave her a shot. We followed the process. We followed the rules that the judge gave us, and I don't know, you can feel good about it. I think you just feel satisfaction that you've done the best job you could.
Yeah.
And you can render some kind of justice.
And then an hour later, the verdict's read. You're brought in the courtroom for the final time. You see Lori. What was your thought to her reaction to guilty on all counts?
Almost felt like she expected it. It wasn't a surprise to her. I felt her cold.
What would you say to her? Do you have any desire to talk to her?
I don't. If she wanted to speak to me, I would. I think to just to do it, I guess. I saw evil true evil for the first time in my life.
So my camera went out, but I am still here, and hopefully you can still hear me. The part where he talked about that she was not surprised. That's exactly what I thought when we watched it. I don't think her lawyers were surprised. I don't think she was surprised. I don't think anybody was surprised at this verdict, because again, this is why you discuss this stuff with your client and you prepare them. You prepare them for the worst. You prepare them for what's going to happen. And I think that's really, really important. And then, of course, he said he thought he saw evil for the first time.
There's a phase to evil. It was hers. And I've seen some bad things in my life, but I think for the first time, truly evil.
Wow. What would you say to Larry and Kay?
You know, I watched them, and I could see Larry way better than I could see Kay. I watched him go through that every day. Be respectful of the court, the process, but I can only imagine what he felt like inside. And although their feelings or their demeanor didn't sway my opinion in any way, as a human being, you can't help not to feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
And seeing their grandbaby, you know, how they found him, that had to be one of the hardest things any person can do in their lifetime. And yeah, I'd like to tell them that I'm sorry for everything that's happened, and there's nothing that any one of us can say that's gonna make it right or bring the kids back. But hopefully this brings them some closure and peace of mind, and they can continue their lives.
And I imagine you'd say the same thing to Tammy's family.
Yeah.
Her parents and siblings.
Yeah.
What, looking back now, is there something you wish you would have seen more of? Obviously, you said you wanted more of the defense. Anything that you would say, I really wish we would have had this or that would have made it easier? Or
Yeah, I think the text messages between Chad and Lori around the times of the murders, I think that would have been really helpful. The text messages between Chad and Alex on October 9th and again on October 18th.
Yeah.
And I don't know, footage, video camera. Oh, gosh, everybody has a ring on their door now. Those apartments had them. And when Alex got in there at 3 a.m. for Tylee, and then again at, I think around the same time on September something for JJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would have been even more solid stuff. What do you want to add?
You know, nothing. I think when you approach jury service, I think it's hard to be excited about it because who wants to spend their time sitting in the room, you know, when you have other obligations, whether it's work, life, kids. But I think I appreciate our justice system. You know, I think we're a great country because of it, and I respect the process. And although it's a huge inconvenience, I was happy that I could serve and do my duty. And, you know, I feel good about doing it and the amount of time that I put in it and that I remained open-minded throughout the whole time.
Do you realize now, or when did you realize that this was such a big case?
I think during the week of trial being selected, the jury being selected.
Oh, so at the beginning, you figured this is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, again, I knew enough about it to know once I realized, oh, that's Lori sitting right there. I think then and in the process, especially because the last 2 times I was there, I think I was selected within the first 2 hours. So, and there weren't that many people.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was evident to me that this is going to be a big case. And then the judge did say, this is expected to be 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, so many people have said to thank you for your service. So, and I thank you as well, along with the other jurors, and for giving up all of that time to be there and help the legal system at work. And thank you for talking with me, Saul.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Anything you want to add?
No, if you are ever summoned, you know, approach it with an open mind. I think it's one of the liberties that we have in this great country of ours. And, you know, I know not everybody wants to take their time, but I think it's how our justice system works.
So, wow, I loved that. And because my camera's not working, because it's in fact dead and plugged in and charging, so I don't know how it's dead, but this computer setup is so miserably annoying that I have. That was all fully done and redone, but it just seems to always be happening. So I apologize that I don't have a camera, but it's okay. You're not here to see me. We're here to watch the interviews together. And because of that, I'm going to transition right into the alternate juror. But I will answer when my camera comes back on, when the charging is worked enough to get it working. I will come on, answer a few questions, and I'll continue to kind of talk through the interview because you can still hear me, but not see me. So I apologize for the inconvenience, but I loved the way he ended that interview, encouraging people to take responsibility and to take it seriously and to go in with an open mind. I loved it. I absolutely love that guy. Probably my favorite juror interview that we have seen to date. Now, there's another one that I haven't watched from an alternate juror. Let's take a listen to what she has to say.
So we have a very special guest with us right now, a juror from the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. Tiffany is with us. Tiffany, thank you so much for coming here on Law and Crime. I really appreciate you taking the time. Now, let's be very clear. You were an alternate juror. You were not in the deliberation room for the final decision, but I have so many questions for you. My first question is, What was that like? You were sitting on a jury for a trial that was watched by the entire country, even internationally, people were watching it. What was it like to sit on that jury?
It was an incredibly surreal experience. I don't know. There was about 2,000 jurors that showed up, and every day that I showed up, I was like, no, there's no way I would get picked. There's just no way. And then it went down to 100, and then down to 18, and then I was one of the last 18 standing. So it was just extremely surreal experience to be picked as one.
And let's be clear, you didn't know anything about Lori Vallow Daybell, anything about this case before you walked in there?
Well, that was one of the questions that was on the questionnaire, and also.
All right, let's pause it because look what decided to turn on, and I want to answer a couple questions. Amanda H. Peter, during jury selection, if someone has been selected multiple times, do lawyers get to know what the trial was and the results? What they can know is what kind of trial, civil or criminal, and did you come to a verdict? They're not able to ask, was it a guilty verdict or a not guilty verdict? So very good question. Lisa, defense attorneys should at least fake it, even if they don't believe their client is innocent, like teaching. Some days are hard, but the students never know it. I mean, maybe not fake it, but at least explain it in a way that if you believe there is reasonable doubt or you have an argument, that it's a believable argument. Kim, Peter, do you feel that Alex Cox really passed from pulmonary thrum, whatever, and CVD? Medical examiners can be wrong. Even if he did these diagnoses, karma seems real. The timing was impeccable. That is wild. That is hard to believe. And my camera has died again. So let's get back to the video.
So the prosecution and defense asked us in person, in an in-person interview. So I had told them that I did know a little bit about the case, but not a lot. I don't typically watch the news. So I knew a little bit. I knew who she was. I knew the crimes that were against her. But other than that, I hadn't watched any other news coverage.
Well, it's a good thing you weren't watching Law and Crime then. That's the one time I say I'm happy you weren't watching us, because this is.
Yeah, sorry, no offense. I wasn't watching.
Hey,
I wasn't watching it.
So what's interesting is both jurors stated that they did know something about the case. Both jurors stated that they had heard about the case. And most people and most things being reported were negative. So that shouldn't be a surprise that they may have come in with a bit of a negative connotation or thought of Lori Vallow.
Oh, that's a good thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to sit on that jury. I am fascinated by that, though, because I'll be completely honest with you. If I knew about this case beforehand, I don't think I'd be able to sit on that jury. I don't think I'd be able to be impartial. How were you able to say, you know what, I've seen things about it, but I'm able to be impartial and able to judge this case based on the facts and the law?
Well, I guess maybe it's my profession and my former experience in the military. I'm just a very neutral person. I feel like everybody has a side to the story. I don't usually judge people right away. And since I didn't know a lot of facts, or I hadn't seen any documentaries, or I hadn't seen any news on her, I felt like I was going to be very impartial, even though I have a child that's Tylee's age. So I knew that it was going to be difficult, probably trying to be impartial to somebody, where children were murdered. But I do believe in the process that everybody deserves a fair chance and not.
Again, another juror who is comparing and thinking about her situation and her life experience and kind of bring it into the case. It's incredibly common. There's nothing really wrong with it, but it's just evidence that it actually does happen.
Be decided to be guilty without getting their fair trial in court.
That's great to hear. I'm an attorney, and I think that's very commendable to hear. I'm always happy to hear that from our jurors, that they're able to, put aside any bias or prejudice or past information, able to just hear what this case is about. When you were sitting on that jury and you were in that courtroom day in, day out, did you have any sense of how big of attention there was brought to this case? Did you understand or have a sense of the media attention, how many people were watching this case? Now, obviously, there were no cameras in the courtroom, but the audio was actually being played back on news outlets every day. Did you have an idea about how many people were invested in this case?
When I was in the process of it, it was like the final 18, somebody had mentioned that there was a documentary on Netflix about it. I'm like, oh, wow, this is a huge case for me to be a part of. But I had no idea that the case was being recorded in court. I just knew that they didn't have any cameras in there, but I didn't know it was being recorded for the news media. And we were told that a majority of the people in the audience were journalists. So we were constantly checking you guys out.
Well, you were, but like, how hard was it to not read anything about the case or talk about the case when you left every day?
It was extremely difficult. Being a juror and being one of 18 and having to go back to our room that we were in, and we were instructed not to be able to talk to anybody. And we couldn't talk to family members who might have been looking at the media, like the news coverage of it. So it was extremely difficult just to kind of keep it all in and not being able to talk about it. There was just many nights that I came home and was just crying and devastated and just not being able to get it out and talk about it to anybody. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. I've been following the case since 2019 from the very beginning. Going into this trial, I knew a lot about it. But I'll tell you right now, there were things that were presented in that trial that we didn't know before. So, for example, we didn't know how Tylee and JJ were killed. We learned it the same way that you did. When you're sitting in that courtroom and you're listening to those details and you're hearing these bizarre things about religion and the way these kids were killed, what did you think of that, hearing that for the first time?
Well, exactly, probably what you thought. That this is just so bizarre.
I'm glad he asked that question, and she agreed, because everybody watching was thinking, this is wild, this is bizarre, this is so weird. How is this possible? And that's exactly what the jury was thinking too.
Most of the time was looking at Lori Vallow to see how she reacted to evidence, or how she reacted to pictures, or how she reacted to the video. So I looked at her probably 95% of the time just to see how she reacted to the information that was presented, because I was shocked to just hear some of the things in the phone calls and see the texts. I just, and there was so much to it that there's so much evidence to piece together that it was just so bizarre. I never knew that it was so complex, that there was.
And again, she said she was focused on how Lori Vallow reacted. What was her face doing? What where were her eyes? Was she looking here, there? Was she reacting to the text messages, to the pictures, anything like that? That is absolutely a common thread throughout jurors, which is why when Letitia Stalk is flipping off witnesses, the jurors see that. When she is acting strange or saying things or responding to witnesses, the jury sees that. That's why the lawyers bring it up to the judge. They're not trying to be annoying. The research shows us and tells us, and especially stuff like this that we see, the jurors are watching the client's every move. We know that. We tell our clients that. Some understand and act appropriately. Others can't help themselves.
So many criminal activities tied to this particular case.
Yeah, and when you were watching, no worries. When you were watching her, did she make eye contact with you at all? What did you think of her behavior in court?
I felt like she did look at us a couple times, but for the most part, she avoided eye contact. And I looked at her during some critical times where I felt like maybe I should have seen some emotion on her face, but I didn't see anything. It just felt like she didn't accept that, these charges were against her, or maybe she still felt like that she was in some higher power, that these charges, didn't apply to her. I don't know, but she just seemed very unemotional for most of the trial.
Well, let's be clear. I was going to save this for the end, but I actually really want to know this right now. You were an alternate. You didn't get the ability to vote in this case. If you did sit in this jury room, if you had the ability to deliberate, you've had the ability to cast a vote, would you have convicted Lori Vallow Daybell? I
definitely would have. I mean, I think a majority of us, at first I was disappointed that I didn't get to speak my voice, but I honestly feel that a majority of us felt the same over the 5 weeks, that we had heard enough evidence to be able to even.
And again, she didn't talk to them. They're not allowed to talk about the case beforehand, so she doesn't actually know that that's what they believed, but she felt like she understood enough from being around them that they were all saying the same thing.
Before going to the jury room, that we were going to convict her, find her guilty on most of the charges. There was one charge in particular that I might have needed to deliberate a little bit longer on.
Ooh, that's interesting. So one charge, what do we think? Do we think it's I would say Tammy Daybell, but maybe it's the Tylee. Maybe she was with the other juror that thought the Tylee charge was harder to prove, or that they didn't prove it. Some of you have already seen it, but give a guess. Was it Tylee or was it Tammy that she would have felt was the hardest charge to? Okay, Tammy, people are guessing, unless you already know and you've seen it, of course. Let's hear what she says.
But
what was
the
that
most
one?
part, I would have gone in there. That was the charge against Tammy Daybell.
What was your hang-up?
No surprise, really. No surprise that it was Tammy. We get that, but let's hear her explanation.
Because I'll tell you, from the outside, we were struggling with that as well. We were wondering whether or not the jury would convict her of conspiracy to commit the murder of Tammy Daybell. We didn't know if there was enough there. What was your take on it?
I agree. I mean, I would have gone into the deliberation rooms, and that would have probably been the one that I would probably want to talk about the most. I felt pretty solid on the other charges, but the one on Tammy Daybell, I did not feel solid on. Like, I just don't feel that there was solid evidence for her charge as opposed to the other charges.
Do you think that Chad is the one who killed her? Because that seemed to be what the prosecutors were suggesting.
I think he definitely had a heavier hand in it. Yes, I do.
Once again, if you're Chad Daybell, here's a lawyer, and you're listening to these jurors, she just said, yes, I think he had a heavier hand, meaning she would have convicted Chad Daybell off the same evidence that they're going to present in his in his trial. So both of the jurors, that even the alternate that we've heard from, definitely think Chad is going to get convicted of some kind of murder charge. So be advised, Chad Daybell.
Did you think the testimony about Tammy, where Lori said, the night that someone tried to shoot Tammy, and Lori made these comments that she was on the phone with presumably Alex Cox and called him an idiot, and seemingly that he missed his shot and I can't do anything right, and that she had said to Zulema Pastenis, that Tammy was a dark spirit and that she was going to die. Did that just wasn't enough for you to feel that she had a role in Tammy's death?
I don't know if I don't say it would be enough. I would have just had to talk about it probably a little bit longer for that charge than other charges. I mean, there was information and evidence that supported their case about the Tammy Daybell charge, but it just wasn't as solid as the other charges.
So what was some of the testimony or evidence that
So again, closing arguments can be very important, not to necessarily convince the jury or switch their side or recap everything, but she would have had to be convinced of the charge for Tammy. And I think just like the jurors did with the other juror explaining how they explained what evidence and what exhibits pointed to that, the same would have been done for her. And I think she would have gotten there too, based on how all the other jurors reacted. Beverly, no, he has his own lawyer.
really stood out to you and led you to believe that Lori killed her kids?
Oh boy, there's a lot of information, a lot of evidence that was provided for that one. I think it was kind of what the prosecutor said at the end. It was a money motivator, that she learned her lesson with Charles Vallow, that she didn't get his $1 million, and she made sure it seemed premeditated that she made sure to transfer Tylee's funds into her account.
Whoa. Anybody else catch that bombshell? As I think my camera's turning back on for at least a second. Yes. She just said she learned her lesson with Charles Vallow when she didn't get the $1 million. So she, in her mind, is convicting her of the Charles Vallow charges and said that she learned her lessons by not getting the money there. So she made sure she got it this time. And again, the Charles Vallow stuff was just supposed to be like similar act evidence or just for background and not something you're supposed to consider for these charges and not something you're supposed to convict on. But this is what happens when you get all this other bad acts evidence in, and it's the generally bad guy rule. She just convicted Lori Vallow of the crimes against Charles Vallow. Those are still pending, along with new charges that we just found out about. I guess that she was indicted on conspiracy to commit murder of her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux. So it's not over for Lori Vallow. Diamonds and doggies. Peter, how honest can the client be with their attorney? Can they admit guilt privately and still be defended? Yes, they can be completely honest. They can't admit guilt. The lawyer just can't lie, can't present something he knows is not true, cannot allow the client to get on the stand and lie and ask questions that will elicit lies. But they still can see if the state can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt and hold the state to their burden, even if their client has admitted it. M. Dean, Peter, I love your Sherbert shirt. I just got mine yesterday. Well, send us a picture on Instagram or Twitter at Tragos Law. Give us a follow. Send us a picture if you buy some merch, especially if you buy this shirt today that I'm wearing. It is probably my favorite piece of merch that I have. I do love some of the hats as well. And my Nothing Burger tank, of course, which is going to make an appearance in a video soon. So keep an eye out for that. We got some fun stuff to announce. Not going to do it on this video, but thank you, M. Dean. And I'd love to see you wearing the shirt.
Just prepping for Tylee's death, I think, and also just the text messages. I think those were solid evidence as well, that she was constantly asking, what the death percentages were for her kids and talking, about evil spirits that they needed to be gotten rid of. It was just clearly encouraging her brother, Alex Cox, to do some harm because they had evil spirits in them.
I also absolutely love another thing that we talked about was the definition of conspiracy and how that word encourage is in there and how the prosecutors highlighted that word and how the jurors that we're hearing from are repeating that word. That is so important. That was so obvious that that's what Lori Vallow was doing in the text messages, encouraging this behavior and this conspiracy to commit these crimes. They're all repeating it. The prosecutor highlighted it. It's in the jury instructions. It's in the actual language defining the charge of conspiracy. That is how it is supposed to work, especially with some good lawyering.
So Alex Cox, as I'm sure you know, is dead, and he's not going to be tried. So we'll never really know the full story. Do you believe he was the one who killed the kids?
I do. Yes, I do. From what I remember, there was so much evidence that there was his palm prints or fingerprints on the bag. There was consistent evidence that he was in the area. I mean, that's actually eventually how they found where the graves were, because his cell phone on the cast report.
Boom. Cell phone pings worked. Juries like them. This is a little wink, wink in how it will work with Brian Kohberger. If the state testifies to them, if FBI agents testify that this is what it means, the jurors are going to believe it usually, and they're going to use it, and it's going to be important evidence, just like it was in this case. And I agree with her in this case. Those pings are really important evidence, especially when corroborated with where the bodies were found.
Or his cell phones was pinging off towers exactly in the location that the grave sites were. So I do believe that he carried out Lori's orders. I do.
That's funny you say. That's interesting.
Lori's
You say Lori's
orders.
orders. So the defense tried to make it seem almost that, you know, she didn't know what was happening, and maybe it was Chad was the ringleader. Chad was the one who was controlling her. What did you think of that argument? Did you have any hesitation at any point saying, you know what, maybe Lori didn't know what was going on? There was one text message between Chad and Lori where she asked if there's a plan. Is there a well-orchestrated plan? And he seemed to say there is a plan. Did you think at any point that Lori might not know what's going on?
Oh boy, you're asking some tough questions.
Listen, I've been following this case from the beginning, so I'm so happy to talk to you right now about it.
I do believe, from what I heard from the evidence, that she encouraged her brother in multiple circumstances to commit crimes.
She uses the word again, encouraged.
Did she know exactly what happened to the kids? I don't know. I knew that. I do think that she knew that they were killed, probably to get rid of their evil spirit. But do I think that she knows under what circumstances, where, you know, how it was done? I don't know about that. Nothing was ever presented to us that gave us.
I think that's fair. And I think that's, again, I think she was listening to the defense's argument and believed part of it too, that she didn't know. And some of the context of the text messages would prove that she didn't know exactly. But especially for the conspiracy counts, which we said all along are the easiest counts to win because of the text messages, she encouraged, she knew bad stuff was coming and was in on it. And it seems like that's the way the jury went down as well.
Any inclination that she knew exactly what happened to them?
Well, her hair being found on the duct tape that was wrapped around JJ, an argument can be made she was there when he was killed. Do you believe that?
That one was hard. I do think the defense had a solid argument with that, that, you know, a mother's hair could be found on clothing, and that, you know, the bodily fluids could have possibly displaced it. I do think they had.
It's so funny that all the jurors independently, without talking to each other, think the same way about these different pieces of evidence. Because is it Saul? Was that the other guy's name? I can't remember. Sorry. The guy Nate interviewed that was actually on the jury and deliberated, he said the same thing, that the, you know, defense made a good argument, which I like, that the jurors are saying, I'm not just agreeing with everything the prosecutor says. It's like, prosecutor makes a good argument, makes sense with common sense, fits the evidence. I'm going to go with them here. Defense makes a good argument. I'm going to go with them here. I believe their argument. I really like that. That really shows a fair and unbiased juror that's trying to balance everything.
Had a solid argument against that hair. So that wasn't actually, the hair itself was not a deciding factor for me, I don't think.
Well, it's interesting you say that Lori might not have known exactly what happened, but you felt confident enough, if you would have gone into the deliberation room, and obviously, you know, you've had conversations and maybe your feeling would have been different, but to say that you would have found her guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit the murder of the children. Walk me through that. What was it about the evidence that you said, you know what, even if she might not know of exactly what happened to the kids, she murdered them. She was a part of that first-degree murder. She directed her brother. She was part of the plot. What evidence led you there?
Well, the judge made it extremely clear to us that we may not get the smoking gun, like we're not going to get the text, you know, from Lori that to kill my kids for me, Alex. That she didn't actually physically have to kill her kids for, you know, for her to be convicted of murder. I just think that there was enough evidence, circumstantial evidence, that she planned it, she encouraged it, and saw it through. And that to me is what the judge had instructed us to look at.
You mentioned the text.
Again, that's a really good job of making sure the jury understands the crimes charged and the definitions, and doesn't let the other side maybe muddy the waters or confuse the jury.
Messages, I think those were pivotal. My opinion was that's the closest we could probably get to that smoking gun. Although I will tell you, and I'm curious your thoughts, the phone calls between Chad and her son, Colby Ryan, and her sister, Summer Shiflett. What did you guys think of that?
Oh boy. Those were tough to hear. Really tough. So much emotion from her sister, from her son, so much emotion, and just zero emotion from her. Saying that they're, you know, safe, you know, don't worry about it. I don't know. It was so bizarre that these family members that she's loved all of her life, and she has zero emotion on the phone with them, and stands by her story. It was just so bizarre that she didn't give in and cry or just show any emotion to them at all.
That fact that she didn't show that emotion, and also, like you said, kind of in the courtroom not showing emotion, would that have guided your decision?
I think it would have helped a little bit, maybe just to see, you know, that maybe I was manipulated by Chad. You know, that, I don't know, like just having zero emotion about your kids missing or losing your living son. I mean, you're losing your relationship with him. You're losing your relationship with your sister. Like, I honestly think that a human being that thinks that they know that they've done wrong would have definitely showed more emotion than that. There's just so many people hurt by this.
Yeah, and you're hearing about demons and dark spirits and death percentages and these, you know, religious figures and notions. I'm still shocked at what I heard from that. What were you thinking when you heard about the religious indoctrination and castings? What were you thinking about?
Well, it sounded like a cult to me. I mean, but the defense had a good point. They only had 6 people, or however many in their little cult. So I just think that in this particular case, religion and their beliefs were used to manipulate people, and I know that can happen.
I mean, literally, this is the type of stuff we were talking about, all the chat was talking about, and that's why I say finger on the pulse. Chat, has the finger on the pulse of what jurors are thinking. It's why you guys are potential jurors. That's why this is such an interesting discussion to have with you all, and why I appreciate you all giving your opinion here and voting on polls and taking part in this, because the cult behavior, the religious manipulation, that's something we've been talking about the entirety of the time we've been covering this trial.
Open about religion and people's religious beliefs, and I don't cast judgment on people, but when your religious beliefs and you start manipulating others, especially to do these violent crimes, I mean, that's where it's just bizarre to me. I just don't understand how somebody could reach that point.
Did you think that it was Chad manipulating her into this at all?
I do. I do believe in the beginning when she met him, the defense did mention that she was a loving mother and had a very normal life. Yes, she was part of the LDS Church, which is no big deal. I mean, a lot of people, especially in Boise, are part of the LDS Church. But I do believe things changed for her in October. I think it's October 2018 when she met him. That I do believe.
And that's exactly what the defense's closing was. That everything changed for her when she met Chad. So it definitely seems like this jury thinks Chad had a heavy hand, even if it switched and Lori became the alpha or whatever, the leader. Chad definitely changed things for Lori.
That he manipulated her into believing some certain ideas, and she, for some reason, joined him in those beliefs.
By the way, I just want to go back to Tammy for a second, because you said you had some hesitation there. The prosecution presented the evidence that she and Chad got married 2 weeks after Tammy died, that she was shopping for wedding rings before Tammy died. What did you think of those pieces of evidence?
That was pretty damning evidence, to be honest with you. Like, she's, just shopping for wedding dresses and wedding rings and seemingly planning for her new life before his wife died. So, I mean, that right there was evidence that she was also the manipulator as well. I mean, I did see some text between her and him that it seemed like she eventually manipulated him, asking him, when is Tammy's death percentage going to get to 0? Kind of manipulating him through text with asking, enjoy your family, all this stuff out of the picture now. Those were definitely manipulation tactics. And I think she used those against Chad to get what she wanted in the end.
I want to talk about the defense a little bit. They didn't call any witnesses. They just focused their case purely on questioning the prosecution's witnesses, and they had a closing argument. What did you think of their case? Did they give you any moment of hesitation, any pause to think twice about what the prosecution was saying?
Such similar interview questions too, which I think is always funny to watch back to back.
Okay.
I was actually, I know that, we get given instructions that the defense never had to come up with witnesses or come up with a defense at all. Really. We knew that from the beginning,
but clearly she didn't like it based on that reaction, right?
I was honestly very surprised that we at least didn't get some witnesses that supported that she might've been manipulated by Chad, or some psych evaluation that might've helped their defense.
Would that have changed your opinion?
Psych evaluation, which the defense wanted to do, but Lori Vallow refused to let them use that. And they couldn't present any evidence that Chad was manipulating Lori because Lori wouldn't allow them to do that, and was reportedly mad after their closing argument pointed the finger at Chad. So that's the type of evidence this jury was looking for that Lori refused to allow her lawyers to use.
Well, it depends on what the psych evaluation said, Right. I don't know. Maybe. It's hard to speculate on something that I never got to see any witnesses or defense.
She didn't take the stand either. Now, jurors are not supposed to take that into their consideration when they render a verdict. But, the fact that she chose not to testify, what'd you think about that?
That's actually one of the juror questionnaires, or the questions on the questionnaire was, do we think the defendant should have to testify? And I marked no. I feel like any person who is being on the stand and being interrogated might slip up, even if they didn't commit a crime. I just don't know. Not everybody can say what they mean.
I kind of love that answer. It's like people can sound bad on a very stressful, scary situation and say something that a very well-trained lawyer in arguing, and words are important and definitions are important, like we always say, and understanding that they can make somebody sound like they're guilty sometimes. So she can understand if people don't want to take the stand in the highest stress situation of their life. I love that answer.
What they say when they're being interrogated on the stand. So I wasn't surprised that she didn't take the stand.
Would there have been anything that she could have said that maybe would have changed your opinion? I mean, if she came on the stand and threw her brother under the bus and threw Chad under the bus, how would that have related to you?
It might have. Again, I'm speculating like what she would have said. You know, if she had said I felt manipulated by him, that I never gave any orders to um, cause harm to my kids, you know, that causing harm to my kids was taken out of context by my brother. I mean, anything might have helped her, I think. Would I have changed my mind? I don't know. I mean, again,
Honestly, that makes the most sense, that we said all along her only defense is pointing the finger at Chad. And when asked what she could have said or if this would have changed her mind, the only thing that really sounds like it would have changed her mind is she would have pointed the finger at Chad and Alex, which again, we knew, but she never was going to do.
and it's just speculating based on something that just didn't happen.
So do you think the defense didn't do a great job? You think that they could have done more? And maybe it was like a missed opportunity a little bit?
Well, I guess I think about the Casey Anthony trial, and I relate it a little bit to that. Not a lot, but I mean, I just do feel like maybe that's what I was expecting, you know, because I did know about the Casey Anthony trial and her defense putting on a great defense for her. So yeah, I was expecting a little bit more than what we were offered. Although their closing arguments, I just feel it was like a little too late.
It's interesting.
Closing arguments are too late. I mean, it's not supposed to be too late for closing arguments, but that was very interesting as well. That was very interesting as well, because she said she watched the Casey Anthony trial. She watched them put on a great defense. And Casey Anthony, we all remember, won. So is this going to be something, a new age of jurors? All of you in the chat have watched lots of trials. Is that going to change? And I think it will. I think it's impossible for it not to change your expectations as to what you expect to see from a lawyer, what you expect to see put on as a defense, because of the fact that you have watched these trials before sitting as a juror, which she also did, which is just wild to think of. Her perspective and her personal experience is she has watched other trials. She watched a good defense be put on, which made her think even less of these defense attorneys not putting on a case. Very interesting to me. The little tidbits you pick up.
You say that. That's what we were saying on air too. Is it a little too late with what they were saying?
Oh.
I do want to talk
like
to
they should
you.
have probably said some of that a long time ago. Jeez.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, but
I
the
do wanna
reason
talk
they
to you
didn't
about
is
what I
because Lori
believe-
Vallow wouldn't allow them to, I think.
I think a lot of us would agree was probably the most difficult day. And that was finding out what happened to JJ and Tylee. Seeing those images of them and understanding how they died, I can imagine that was an incredibly difficult day. What was that day like for you?
Oh boy. We had already seen, you know, JJ, everything beforehand. We'd already seen some pictures of JJ's burial, him being, you know, unearthed, you know, with the whatever that team is, the evidence recovery team. So I personally didn't think that we would have to go through the autopsy pictures, you know, because it was pretty much the same pictures except just removal of the tape and the bag and whatnot. But that was the hardest day for me. I couldn't even. I mean, I just cried. I tried to hide my tears a lot because I know we weren't supposed to show emotion, and yeah, it was incredibly disturbing that somebody would do that to kids. And I would come home to my team.
Nothing wrong with her crying. She's a human being with emotions, and she did the right thing to try to not show a lot on the outward. But just because she was sad and that somebody would do that to those kids and because she was crying doesn't mean that she thinks it was Lori Vallow automatically. The evidence made her think that, which I think is a good explanation.
Teenage daughter and just cry, you know, and she would just hold me and give me a hug. And there was one day I saw a kid like walking in the grocery store, you know, with his pajamas on and his bare feet. And I just came home and I just cried. Like how somebody could do something just, you know, to children like that. Just it's pure evil.
And I think this gives us an idea of how the jurors are affected and the counseling and things that are given to them or available to them. The resources after a situation like this are so important because even she wasn't even in there rendering the guilty verdict, but just the toll that this case took on her and other jurors.
It really is. And, you know, I always said this because I was following the case. I said, I felt really bad for you guys because you shouldn't have to see that. And, you know, jury service and jury duty is just incredibly hard as is. But to see that, I really, really felt bad for all of you that you were exposed to that level of detail and had to witness that. And I'm sorry that you had to see that. And I know that must have been incredibly difficult. We had our reporters who were talking about how difficult it was for them. When you were watching that, did you get angry? Did you feel like you wanted justice for the children? Because I mean, it's hard to separate it. Everybody's human. Seeing that, you get angry. I would.
I mean, of course, you know, any normal human being or parents. I mean, most of us on the jury were parents. I mean, you would be just evil inside if you didn't have any kind of emotion or reaction to that. You know, you want to give them justice. Those kids need justice to what happened to them, and because they no longer can speak for themselves. And you know, I think somebody needed to, and Lori in particular, needed to be held responsible for it.
How do you think Lori perceived her children at the end of the day? Because she at one point was seemingly a loving mother, and then this. I mean, what do you think she thought of them? How do you think she justified this?
I have no, I mean, I have zero answer for that. I really don't. I don't know how any parent could justify encouraging somebody to murder their child, encouraging somebody to, there's
Money, sex, and power. That's how. You know, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Now, rational people realize how despicable and evil that is, but I think the state hit it right on the head.
you know, evil spirit in them that must be gotten rid of. How somebody, a parent could lie to numerous people about where your kids are while you're off enjoying, you know, multiple vacations in Hawaii. It's just, it's not what a normal parent would do.
Do you think that it was all about the money? It was all about her relationship with Chad, or do you think that it was something more?
I think it was just a storm, a whirlwind of things just collided in October 2018 when they got together. That it was part religious belief that they thought that they were higher powers, that they were going to be the last people standing on this earth. That was one aspect of it. And I do honestly believe that money had a lot to do with it as well, because I'm sure, as you heard during the trial, that there was numerous people who would have taken the kids.
Yep.
You know, if she had problems with them, if she thought they were evil spirits, or they were, you know, JJ had special needs and it was incredibly hard for her, then she had numerous people that she could have asked to take the kids. And that's where I do feel that the financial gain came into play. That she knew that if the kids went somewhere else, that the money would follow them.
It's such a tragedy, that aspect, because they could have lived. Chad and her could have, you know, moved on and started a life. That's one of the heartbreaking aspects of it.
Which is why the money comes in and why it was such an important factor, because it wasn't just about power and sex. They could have done that and given the kids to somebody else. The money part is why they had to commit these horrible crimes.
I know we have a couple minutes left. So much evidence was presented about Charles Vallow. You and the rest of the jury were not tasked with deciding whether or not she was involved in his murder. I don't know if you know this, but Lori Vallow is charged with conspiracy to commit the murder of Charles Vallow out in Arizona. Based on what was presented in this courtroom, do you think that she plotted to kill Charles Vallow?
She already said yes to this.
Oh boy, that's a hard question for me to answer, because I didn't have all the evidence to that case, and I don't know the legalities of
because you remember the beginning of the interview, she said she learned from Charles Vallow and did it right the second time. I think she's giving a politically correct answer here, but I think she thinks Lori Vallow is guilty over there too. She did hear a lot of evidence, so it's not like she's basing it off nothing, but I did think that was interesting off the jump.
Being able to tell us what happened in Arizona, because I do feel like we got bits and pieces of it, but not the full story. So that would be hard for me to be able to make any judgment on.
That's fair. Let me ask you this. If Alex Cox and Chad Daybell were also being tried in your courtroom, and you had to decide whether or not they were responsible, they were guilty of the murders of the kids and Tammy Daybell, based on what was presented to you, do you think that you would have had enough evidence to convict Alex Cox and Chad Daybell?
Oh, yes. They were all three working together. I mean, and it's unfortunate, Alex, that I feel like he was on. And even in the message, or when he talked to Zulima Pastenas, that he was the fall guy, I honestly believe that they manipulated him so much that he did anything that they said. And he was a warrior for Lori. And yeah, but unfortunately, just being manipulated by somebody doesn't get you off the hook. So I do believe, honestly, that all three of them would be found guilty.
You mentioned that in the middle of the trial, you were feeling that you would vote in favor of guilt. How did you said you were feeling most of the jurors were feeling that same way. How did you know that? Was it just a feeling from them? Were there any sort of conversations?
Well, it's been conversations that we've had after. But during that time, yeah, I mean, we weren't allowed to say anything to each other, and we didn't. We actually went to our room and we ate all that food and we didn't say anything to each other. But I could get the feeling that a lot of us felt the same way, you know?
Yeah. Were you
I mean,
incredibly...
the emotions on the jury, I mean, I could see other jurors crying, and so just the emotions and just their facial expressions, I can see that, you know, they also probably maybe felt the same way that I did.
Were you disappointed that you weren't part of the jury deliberation process?
Obviously, I would think.
I was. I mean, I knew in the beginning that there was going to be 6 alternates. I do feel that I didn't get my say, but I do feel that my fellow jurors deliberated how I would have deliberated and come up with the guilty verdicts as well. So I do feel like that, not that my voice was heard, but I do feel like a majority of us thought the same way. And yeah, I mean, it came out in the verdict that I would have come out with. So it was disappointing. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. You sit through the whole trial and then you don't even get to decide
one
way or another. But, you know, I appreciate you letting us know which way you were leaning and where you were going to go. The one last thing I want to ask you about is in the text messages, there was a lot of sordid details between Chad and Lori and their love affair. I'm just curious what you thought of those, because they're communicating, they're both having affairs. We know that the kids are they're planning to kill the kids and the kids would eventually die. What did you think of their communications back and forth about their love affair?
Well, it was just so odd to me, so odd that, that they got all these burner phones. I mean, they had it seemed like 6 phone numbers apiece. It was so hard to keep track of how many phone numbers that they had. And it was so odd that they had this love connection and that divorce was never, I'm sorry, my nose itches. Divorce was never an option. Like the rest of us normal human beings were if this is the love of your life, then just divorce them. Or, divorce your husband or wife and then go on and live your life happily with the person who you think that you're with. I just think that they both related themselves to these higher powers and the prophet and his wife, and that they were married in prior creations, and that they believed it.
And one of the saddest things is Tammy was none the wiser. She didn't know about the affair. She was very much in love with Chad. It wasn't his ex-wife or his divorced wife. She was very much married to him, and this just happened to her. Before I let you go, Tiffany, I just want to know if you had any final thoughts about what this experience has been like and what you're going to take away from it.
Well, I think for one, it was extremely interesting to be part of this process. I've always been, not picked for juries because I had hardships. So I love seeing our justice system at work and to be part of it. Even though I wasn't the final decision maker, part of the 12, it really helps me know that this process does work. The last thing that I think the investigators who investigated this, and there was a lot of them, really, really did a great job. They really did. And without their evidence and their investigation, this trial, it would have never been, they should have never been found guilty without their investigation.
So that is the interview of the alternate juror. We'll see how long the camera works here. Amy Bates, you can order this shirt on lawyeryouknow.com, our merch site. Check it out. It's in the tie-dye section. You have to scroll for, I think, sherbet is the color of it. John, should jurors be dragged through extensive details, which leads to therapy sessions for some jurors? Thoughts? Tough question to answer. My opinion, it's the only logical way, unfortunately. And your opinion is correct, but I will say, if a juror physically or emotionally cannot handle something like this, that's the point of jury selection. And the lawyers will ask questions so you'll know what's coming. And they may even say, you're going to see some horrible pictures. Are you going to be able to sit through this? And if you really physically or emotionally just cannot, or if something like this happened to your kid, you're not going to be on this juror. Go be on a car accident jury. Go be on a medical malpractice jury. Go be on some other jury, but you're not the right juror for this question. And Complex basically asked the same question or a similar question. Yes, if you can't emotionally handle it, you're not going to be picked for this jury. Azam, Peter, off topic. Please don't hate me for this. I remember the day you talked about how you used to have short hair, clean shaven, look like an 18-year-old. Some people didn't think you were a lawyer. So how about an 18-year-old Peter for $250K? Ain't going to happen, Azam. Ain't going to happen. It could be 5 million subscribers and ain't going to happen. The hair is staying for now until I get sick of it or my wife gets sick of it. But for now, it's staying. So I don't hate you at all for asking the question. You got to shoot your shot. We'll come up with something fun for $250. We got some time for that. I'm really excited about the members only video next week. And we've got some other really fun stuff planned for the members only. If you guys want to join that, don't feel like you have to. Now, what you have to do is hit that like button on your way out. I went overtime, so I don't have a ton of time for questions right now, but I love you all. I appreciate you all for joining me always on this and adding to the conversation, adding your perspective. It is so incredibly important and valuable to me and educational to me. I try to provide that to you as well. Yes, we will have a throwback picture, MB. We can do that easily. So thank you all for joining me. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Who knows what the content's going to be for tomorrow? I don't. You guys let me know. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Actually, it's over here at Tragos Law. And let me know what you want to talk about, what cases are coming up, or the cases that are already out there. I appreciate you all. Sorry for the technical difficulties with the camera. Welcome, Misty, and all the other new members. I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at Tragos Law is our handle. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast featuring new episodes every week. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.